Welcome! This is a tutorial on how to get started with EveManufactureTool. This video is based on version 5.01 and due to the ongoing nature of development, what you see here may not be relevant in future versions. When you first start the application, you'll see a selection of tabs like you see here. We have an Invention tab, Manufacturing tab, LP items, API, Options, and Blueprint defaults. The Invention, Manufacturing, Options and Blueprint default tabs are fairly self-explanatory, whereas LP and API tabs are placeholders for future releases. The Options tab contains a few debugging options, as well as some versioning information. In a future release, expect to see other options here, such as colouring and styling. To start building, you should first go to the Blueprint Defaults tab. EMT works on the idea that you have a collection of BPOs that are well researched. The program was specifically designed to aid in T2 ship manufacturing, so there may be design choices that could seem a little strange if all you build is T1. For this tutorial, we're going to be building some purifiers, Ishtars, Devoters and Panthers. One of the large costs of building a T2 ship are the components. As we're wanting to maximize our profit, we'll be building the components and that means setting some defaults. As you can see, the market group is an exact copy of what you see in game. To set the defaults for any blueprint, you can either navigate to where the product is found, such as Manufacture Research, Components, Advanced Components, MR, or you can find the actual blueprints. So Blueprints, Manufacture Research, Components, Advanced Components, MR. Just click on the market group header and you will get a list of all the blueprints in that group. You can see here that because I've clicked on MR, all I can see are the MR components. Given that we want to set all the T2 components, I can click on a higher market group and it will show me all the blueprints under that section. To set the ME and P of the blueprint, you can either set them individually by entering in a number to the box. So for example 1086, or you can use the box at the top coupled with the buttons either side. Now that we've set all the ME and P values for our components, we're going to set a default assembly line too. With the release of Creus, building at a POS became a thing and the material savings can be quite substantial. For our components, we're going to set them to build in a component array. As you can see here, the list also contains a whole bunch of station variants to build at as well. This is a list that will be cleaned up in the future. By setting the defaults, it ensures that whatever we put in a manufacture batch will always start with these values. If you build a lot of the same thing, you don't really want to be entering the same values over and over again. Now that we've set everything, we need to save what we've changed. If you ever want to, and now we're done with the blueprint defaults, if you ever want to come back to change an existing blueprint or set a new default, just come back to this tab and follow the same procedure. Navigate to the market group that contains the item, set the ME and P required either by using these two buttons up here or by typing in the column, and if required, set an assembly line. So, back to our things. First step is Invention, so click on the Invention tab and add a batch. Within this batch you'll notice there are a number of options. EMT is all about making things easier, so commonly used actions are presented here. You can add a single item with all its decryptors, all items in a group with all their decryptors, or everything in Eve with every decryptor. This last one can take a while and you tend to end up with a lot of fluff that you don't care about, but it does have some uses. A point of note here, when adding something by a group, the name of the group is what CCPers call it, not what the market calls it. For example, bombers appear under the covert ops section of the market, but in here they're actually under a group called stealth bombers. If you can't work out what group something is, open the item in game, click on the description tab and look at the role. I've always found that to match the group that's listed in EMT. Anyway, back to our stuff. So we want to build some purifiers, Ishtars, devoters and panthers. So we're going to use the add item with all decryptors button and add those things to our batch. So we've got purifier, devoter, Ishtar, and panther. So there we go, purifier, devoter, Ishtar, panther. Lovely. Then we want to set the system we're going to invent in. For this example, we're going to use everyone's favourite freighter pipe, Udama, but you can use any system in Eve. When the invention system changed, the copy and invention costs also changed, as will all the other numbers that depend on those. EMT uses the system indices provided by CCP to give you accurate costs and does all the calculations for you. The grey fields here are read-only. They are only there to present you with data. The white fields can be edited. Hopefully the column names are self-explanatory, but I'll go over them just in case. Output BPCs wanted is the actual number of blueprints you want from invention, not the number of runs. Completed is so you can keep a record of how many inventions you have done. This is not a record of how many successes you get, just individual inventions. Skills is set to 444 by default, as I deemed that to be the best time spent training to success chance ratio, but you can change this if you like, either by setting it on an individual invention line, or by setting skills for the entire batch at the top. The rest of the columns are all data that's just calculated for you. Decryptor cost is the total of all decryptors required, but if you mouse over it, it'll show you the cost for a single decryptor. MEPE is the result of the blueprint after a decryptor modifier, as is output runs. Cost per run is just the total cost of inventing divided by the estimated total runs. For example, if I want 3 BPCs of a 3.6 item like this, I can expect to get 3 runs per successful invention, which means 1.4 million at 1.1 million is about 2.5 million divided by 3 is roughly 863,000. On the subject of pricing, there is a pricing region field at the top. It defaults to the forge since that's where Jita is and where most pilots will buy their stuff, but you can change this to any region in Eve. However, it might make the prices a bit strange, especially if there aren't any other item for sale in that region. This field will eventually take a seller system so you can get more accurate prices. You'll notice at the bottom there is also a running total of the batch cost. The data is self-explanatory. Total data call cost, total decrypt cost, and a total of those two things added together. Once you've set up what you want to invent, it's recommended that you press the lock button. This freezes the prices that were fetched and saves them to the batch, so every time you load it up, the cost for everything is still the same. You'll also notice that when the batch is locked, some of the fields grey out, and the only field you can now edit is the completed field. This is just to stop you changing anything that would affect the total cost of the batch. You'll notice here on the right that there is a shopping list. The name again is self-explanatory. In order to build everything in order to invent everything in this batch, you would need to buy this many of these items. The ISPER is acquired from Eve Central using the cell percentile field, which for the most part is a fairly good representation of the actual price that you will pay for an item. So, let's suppose that I've invented all these blueprints, and by the grace of our Jesus, we've got exactly the number we're expecting we want to build. In order to turn this to a manufacture batch, simply press this magical button at the top, and with a little bit of a wait, voila, numbers. Okay, let's start at the top. You'll notice that the build system and the pricing region match those for our invention. EMT assumes you're building in the same system that you invent in, so uses the same system for those indices. On the right hand side, you'll notice there's another expander section. The top half of this contains a list of all the things to be built in the batch, so you can easily get an overview of what it is you're building. If you're building a lot of items, the main pane can get very busy. On the lower half is where any teams would appear, so on that note, let's have a look at teams. By default, the teams window will only show teams that are applicable to items in the batch and are in the selected manufacture system. By applicable, I mean that a team must affect something being built in this batch, be it the final products, a component, T1 hull, RAM. I'm going to untick the only show teams in system for this tutorial, but if you use teams, you'll probably just be able to leave it checked. So, let's find a team that affects medium ships, as we're building both hacks and hicks. I can do this by typing into this box, and you'll see that you very quickly get a list of all the teams that are affecting the medium ship class. You can see here, for example, that this team here has got 0.5% material modifier on all medium class ships and a 7% salary in that system, and it's with half an hour remaining. If I click on it, you can see at the bottom here in the middle that it gives you the rough estimates of the savings the team will give. I say rough because at this stage the batch assumes a few things which may not be true, but will be mentioned shortly. If you use EMT as explained though, the estimate will be accurate enough to know whether a team is going to save you any risk or not. In the bottom right, you'll also see all the things the team applies to, and by mousing over the groups, it'll tell you what it affects. For example, although we search for medium, and medium is highlighted, you can also see very faintly here that it's also got a 1% time modifier on small class ships, which in this case applies to our purifiers. If I mouse over the hick, it shows Devoter, Hack, Ishtar, Cruiser, both the Marler and the Vexor, because they're the T1 hulls that go into building the Hack and the Hick. If I want to apply this team to hicks, I can just click on the hick and then click Apply to Selected. You'll see that it's now appeared here in the background, back in the main window, and the team is now applied to all of the hicks in this batch, which in this case is just the devoters. We'll leave teams here for now, but you can see how easy it is to decide on how much a team is worth, how much it's going to save you by using this window. Back to the main window, and you can either remove a team from this bottom section here by clicking the X, or by clicking the C at the end of the job here. EMT does not allow for teams to be applied to only some of an item in a batch. It's either being applied to all hicks or none. I can't see any reason why you wouldn't want to do it this way, but if you have a valid reason, please let me know and I can consider changing how it works to suit you. As we've created this manufacture batch from an invention, you'll notice that the quantity, ME and PE fields are all automatically filled in for us, as well as the additional charge per run field. If you add an item manually, these are things you'd have to enter yourself, so I would always recommend going through the Invention tab. All of the columns here should be self-explanatory. Grey are read-only, and white can be edited just like an invention batch. The only column that isn't necessarily obvious is build time profit ratio at the end here. The higher this number, the more profit you're making per time spending built components and the final product. For example, while a golem may have a higher margin than a hound, the hound probably has a higher build time profit ratio because it takes far fewer components to make and you spend less time building those components relative to the amount of profit you get out of it. You can also expand a manufacture job to view the components it requires. You can see here that the component BPOs already have the values we entered as defaults, and the assembly line also matches. You can change the ME and PE and assembly line on a per job basis if you wish, but I have yet to find a reason to do so. Dragging in the defaults generally seems to be the best way of doing this. Now that we're happy with what we want to build, we can move into the next stage of the manufacture process. Just like Invention, we press the lock button, and again just like Invention, this will freeze the prices of all the raw materials required and save them along with the batch data. It does not save the prices of the final products, as those will probably change while you're building the components, and it would be pretty useless if you couldn't update those. You can see a new tab has lit up on the left. Selection. In this tab you can select the components you want to build for the batch, as well as indicating how many you already have. Most of the time, clicking Select All is what you want. Once you've selected the components you want to build and filled in any existing amounts, press Lock again. Now we get onto the third tab, Component Building. You can see that all the components from the previous section here nicely grouped and listed by quantity to build. The default is to try and build everything within 24 hours. You can increase this or decrease this, the only difference is the number of total build slots you'll need, as well as some very minor material saving. The slots required to build the components are found down here at the bottom. For this tutorial I'm going to change it to 48 hours. You'll notice that a few of the components now only require one blueprint, whereas the others have all reduced in runs and blueprint count. For example, antimatter reactor units went down from 4 blueprints required just to 2. You'll also notice that the total number of slots required at the bottom has dropped. The longer you take to build the components, the less slots you will need, but the longer you'll have to wait. There's also another option here, Normalize. This will average out the quantities within each component to try and make them the same. If you look at, for example, crystalline carbonides, what happens when I click Normalize? So we've got all of them as 16941 apart from this top one. If I click Normalize, then now all mostly 15654. You'll see that the runs for all of them apart from the top one have dropped, and this whole set now finishes in 1 day 20 hours as opposed to 2 days. Head over to the other expander on the right, and oh, there you go. And here's the bit you've been waiting for, the shopping list. To build all of these components within this time using the values from the blueprint defaults for MEP and assembly line, you'll need to buy these things in these quantities. The total listed at the bottom here, as well as the total is listed at the bottom here, as well as the total volume required to move them. Very handy for working out how many freighter runs it requires. With the way Creus handles material savings, the shopping list is only applicable for the current build within value. If I change this to 24 hours again, you'll notice how the cost will rise ever so slightly, and some of these material quantities will change. When you enter a run for a component with the specified quantity, just click the box. So let's pretend, for example, I've built some of the crystalline carbonide armor plates. Once this whole page is full of grey checkboxes, you know that you've built all the components required for this batch. Supposing that I've now built all the components, I can go back to the batch tab, and if I want, record what I've built and what's left using the acquired column. Assuming they're now also finished, I can use the minimum sell per unit column at the end here to know what my absolute lowest is with the prices I bought everything at. That's everything for using EMT the way it was designed. I hope this video is useful, and may much ISK flow your way.